today we're going to look at Christ and what he did. If you turn with me to Luke, we're going to look at the second half of Luke, basically 23. We're going to talk about the part of this chapter, the part of the chapter of the cross. Does that make sense? The cross. And if you don't have a Bible, we should have some Bibles over there. I think we see. No, Bibles all over the place. This one you can see. Probably 2 or 3 people can see it. Big breath. But I want to give y'all some. But we are looking here at the cross. And this is Jesus, the way that he died. And I think this teaches us so much. We've already studied and read. And I think most of us know how Jesus lived. He lived without sin, right? He did good. He spent his time doing good and teaching and helping people. But then, notice this. It says, verse 26 of Luke chapter 23. Now, as they led him away, they laid hold of a certain man, Simon of Cyrene, who was coming from the country. And on him they laid the cross, that he might bury it after Jesus. We know that the other books of the New Testament says that Jesus took his cross. But also, we know what he went through that night, didn't he? When he went without sleep, that he was beaten and all this. So they had to have someone, and someone had to take that cross. And notice this, they laid it on him, and he buried it after Jesus. I think they're talking about after Jesus in that he followed Jesus. Jesus went before him, and he followed Jesus. But I think of that, you and I today, we too have to bear the cross of Jesus after him, right? Because what Jesus said later, says, whosoever denies me and does not take up the cross and what? Follow me. That's it. So we have to follow it. And by the way, it's not enough to take up the cross of Jesus and not follow him. I say that because so many religious leaders or religious people, they take up the cross and then they do what they want to, and they follow their own teachings and their own will. And instead of taking up, you got to take up the cross and follow what? Follow Jesus. This man, I know it's not the same as this is the literal cross, but it brings to remembrance that we too have to follow Jesus in his teachings and what he has done. The word Christian means Christ-like, and that's what we must do. And it says, and a great multitude of people followed him, and women also mourned and lamented, or mourned or wept, basically, over him, some of the versions says. But Jesus turned to them and said, daughters of Jerusalem, do not weep for me, but weep for yourself and for your children. For indeed the day are coming in which they will say, blessed are the barren womb that never bore, and the breast which never nourished. And they will begin to say to the mountain, fall on us, and to the hill, cover us. For if they do these things in the green woods, what shall be done in the dry? He was saying, right now, the green woods, someone said the green woods was what he was talking about, they was in then. Jerusalem and the Jews was in a green part. In the sense they had God's blessings all around them. They had that he had took care of the poor. Even he had fed them. Everything was blessed. Can you think of a better time in Jerusalem than the time when people was being healed, people was being fed? Right. But still yet the people was upset because they wasn't doing it. Christ was doing it. Mm-hmm. He said, but there's going to come a time, it says it's going to come a bad time. I think he was talking about what was going to happen. Because some 70 years later, Jerusalem was going to be destroyed. There was going to be people starved because Rome was going to be set there. Rome was going to end up burning the temple and tearing it apart. He said, some of those people that was there might see that. and especially the young, and realize what is going to happen. He said, it's going to get worse. And I think, I'm not going to say well, it's going to get worse for all of us, but some of us know it's going to get worse. We live in good times, right? Any of you, how many of you here have always lived in good times and never had any hard times? Y'all, if you say yes, I'm not going to worry about y'all understanding anything in this class. You won't do it. Because we know that there's good times and what? Bad times. And there will be, and I think really right now, there's bad times, there's good time. I'm pray for Barbara. We're going through some hard times in our family. There's been some loss. There's been some. Let's just say hiccups, okay? That we've had some things that we've been setting up and crying and praying about. But the thing about it is, that's the way life is. But we know that we also have the grain of knowing that we have Christ, right? And we have our brethren. Here now, look at this. It goes on. He says this. It says, there was also 2 others, criminals, led with him to be put to death. And when they had come to the place called Calvary, where they crucified him and the criminals, one on the right hand and the other on the left. Then Jesus said, Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they do. I think this is, Father, forgive them, they do not know what they do. I've heard somebody say, who was he talking to? Who was he talking to?
He's talking to God the Father.
I know, but who was he talking about? Who?
I think he was talking about the ones that crucified him.
Yeah.
Okay. Was he talking about the Jews and the Romans, or the Romans and not? He was talking
I think it was the whole totality about how everybody turned from him and did it. Yes.
Well, I say that because I've heard there's some religious groups that say, well, he was talking to the Jews. Some said, well, he's talking to the Romans. I think you're right. I think he was talking to everybody that was there.
Yeah.
The Jews couldn't have done it without the Romans, and the Romans couldn't have done it without the Jews. It was because the Roman leader, what did he said just before in the chapter? He said, you brought this man and I find no reason for him to die. And so, yes, he was talking, Father, forgive them. The Romans didn't know, and the Jews didn't know, even though they should know, they didn't. And look what he said there. And it says, they did not know, and they divided his garments and casted lots. They divided his garment and casted lots. They did that, we know, because the tunic was in one piece, and they didn't want to tear it, so they cast lots to see who would get the best piece. It says, and the people stood looking on, but even the rulers with them what? Stared, saying, he saved others, let him save himself if he is the Christ, the chosen one. And notice, I like this because you look at this, it says, he saved what? It didn't say he claimed to save others. But it says he what? They admitted and they knew that he had saved others that was dying. They knew that he had healed the sick. It's not that he claimed, but he said he healed what? That's a statement that they knew his power, but they still neglected it. Somebody said nobody could do that. They do it every day, every week. I have people, I don't know how, I talk to people and said, well, I'd like for you to come to church. And they said, oh, we know we should go, but we probably won't be there. Do you know? Yeah, we know. Do what? You know you should, but you're going to what? not come. That is people, that's human nature that caused those people then, they knew what he had done, but they just chose not to follow him. And people do that today. And some of us here has been guilty of doing that, right? Stop doing it now, okay? Don't do it no more. Don't do it no more. And that's the only thing I can say about that. Just don't do it no more. And notice it says, the soldiers also mocked him, coming and offering him sour wine and saying, if you are the king of the Jews, save yourself. Here it was, armed men, standing before a naked man on the cross and saying, hey, the Romans thought they was the super soldier of the day, and they was the most powerful army that had ever been in the world. And they looked and said, oh, save yourself. They didn't really believe anybody could save themselves from them. When they got a hold of somebody, that pretty well was what? They were dead. And it says, and an inscription also was written over him in letters of Greek, Latin, and Hebrew. And said this is the King of the Jews. This is the King of the Jews. And they wrote that as mockery to him. And also mocking the Jews.
Yeah.
Also mocking him and the Jews. This is what kind of kingdom you got. This is your king. So then one of the criminals who was hanging blasphemed him and saying, if you are the Christ, save yourself and us. He added something else. Well, people are saying, oh, if you do it, save yourself, save yourself. And then one of them said, if you are, then save yourself and us. But the other answered and rebuked him, saying, do you not even fear God, seeing you are under the same condemnation? And we indeed justly, for we receive the due rewards of our deeds. But this man has done nothing wrong. And he said to Jesus, Lord, remember me when you come into your kingdom. And Jesus said to him, assuredly I say to you, today you will be with me in paradise. That's the death of that person on the cross. He said to him, and a lot of people get a big up about that and said, well, why did he do that? Because he chose to do that. All during Jesus' ministry, he could look at the woman. He looked at the woman and said, thy sins are for what? Forgiven you. Jesus, when he was on the earth, everybody believes, everybody I know of, I hope all of you know and believe, that Jesus could save sinners because he was here on earth and he could do it. And he done it over and over. We don't know how many times he did do it. But we know he done it many times. Even the woman caught in adultery. He said, go and sin what?
No.
Sin no more. So I see that he saved that. And somebody said, oh, yes. And somebody said, well, he was baptized by John. I don't know if he was or not. It don't matter. In the Bible time, before Jesus died, he could save anybody he wanted to because he was on this earth and he was the Son of God and he had that power. Now we today, Jesus, he still has the power. Jesus says, if you love me, keep my what? Commandments. So today we have to keep his commandments. We have to be faithful. Remember, even that back then, what did he tell that woman? He said, go and what? Your sins are forgiven you, but then go and sin what? No. He didn't give her unconditional freedom from sin from then on. He said, let's go and sin no more. I love this. And it says, what happened? It says, today you will be with me in paradise. Now it was about the 6th hour, and there was darkness over all the earth until the 9th hour. Now the 6th hour was what time? That was noon. At noon. High noon. They counted from the sun up to the sun. That was the 6th hour was midday. And it says, then to the 9th hour there was darkness. So from
3 o'clock?
From 12 to 3, there was darkness. The hottest part of the day, the brightest part of the day, but that day it was the darkest. He said, and it says, darkness over all the earth until the 9th hour. Then the sun was darkened, and the veil of the temple was torn in two. The veil of the temple. Now, the veil of the temple where the people could come in, the temple was made up, and they had the temple, and they had the holiest of holy, where the high priest could go in once a year. That was the presence of God there. And nobody could go in but the high priest. They had a veil separating the rest of the priests and all of mankind from getting in. Only the high priest could come into what represented the presence of God. But when Christ died and shed his blood, all of a sudden that veil was ripped. Why? Because anybody today has a right to go, not just a high priest, but anyone can go before God and ask our forgiveness. The high priest had to go for someone. Today, some people think a priest or the Pope or somebody else has to go for them, but that's not the case. That's not the case. Because the veil between mankind and God was torn by the death of Christ. And anybody now, 1 Peter says we are a holy priesthood. We today are a priest. If we are Christians, we are priests. And we can become before the throne of God in prayer. I don't have to pray for you as a preacher for you to be forgiven. Now, if you did somebody wrong, you need to tell them that you are sorry. But you don't have to, they don't forgive you. You get forgiveness from God. If I asked you to forgive me for telling you how I thought you looked, even if it was true, I'll just tease you. You know, if you forgive me or not, I don't care. I hope you would, but I asked God to forgive me for what I did to you. Then I asked you to forgive me. And God has already forgave me, and I pray that you will too. That's the way you do it. Hello, Trouble.
Bathroom's this way. Come on.
I talked to Kitty. She didn't say anything to me. No, but we look at this, and it says the whole crowd. No, here it is. Where am I? First, the sun was darkened, and then when Jesus had cried out, verse 46, with a loud voice, he said, "Father, into your hands I commit my spirit." Having said this, he breathed his last. So when the centurion saw what had happened, he glorified God, saying, "Certainly this was a righteous man." And I don't know the whole story about this centurion, but he must have heard something about the true God of Israel and the God of creation. Because he did not say, the centurion did not say, he glorified God, saying this was a righteous. He didn't say he glorified a God, but he glorified what? God. This man, for some reason, somehow had an understanding there was a God and not a God. And you see that in your King James and New King James. This God here is capitalized, meaning that according to the Greek, he was talking about the Hebrew and the Bible God and not a pagan God. When a pagan God was used, the King James and New King James, they would put it a little God. But they see here that he was talking about the God, not a God. Does that make sense to you? Bible, and that's how you can help. Even if you don't know the Greek or the Hebrews, that's a help for you when you're reading through the Bible. Yes?
Didn't he build up the centurion's servant?
A centurion, it didn't say a centurion.
This is the centurion.
Well, this was the centurion. Every group of soldier had a centurion in charge.
I know.
Now, this is not probably not because it wasn't in the same city.
Oh, okay.
Wasn't in the same city. The centurion, when he says the centurion, it's like saying the man in charge.
Okay.
Because the centurion was the acting unit. That was the one that was the field leader of those. So that's.
Well, maybe he was the centurion of the guys there.
Yeah, he was there. He was in charge. There was somebody in charge, and that's who he was. So the man in charge said this, and said, and it says the whole crowd who came together to that sight, seeing what has been done, beat their breast and returned. I don't know what it's almost like the whole crowd. This is not talking about the Christians. This is talking about, I think, the crowd that had said, crucify him, crucify him. They had went to see like I said, they went to see the hanging. Does that make sense? They the one that saw the excitement. Man, that's almost like that was a good show. To a lot of people that went out there, when they went to the cross, it was a good show. It was something that they went out there, and we think, well, how could that be? And just think back, if you go back just less than 100 years in this country, we even have films of when they used to, in the 20s, just less than 100 years ago, when they used to have a hanging, they would have a party at it. People would come out and public hanging, they would have a party and have music and everything else. Sad to say, that's the way it was done for thousands of years, especially at this time. And they beat like that's a good show, good show. It's like they did that instead of clapping. That was their way of, that was a good show.
I always thought it meant that they were showing guilt or sadness.
I don't think so, because in the Roman, if you look at the Romans, a lot of time we think of it when they beat their breast to women, but the crowds, a lot of times they would do like that. Even in battle, when something went well, that was the sign of beating their chest.
It's still sort of in use today, but about when something bad happens.
Yes,
So you're saying the meaning has kind of changed.
it can mean that too, but it meant
Balls or like guys now say, ooh, or.
yes. Now it could be if somebody hit the heart, but if they hit the heart, it's almost like this. This was sadness. This was, like this.
Now, I've seen it where a lot of people will be like, they'll be love, that means they're saying they got love for you. I see a lot of people use that as a sign for nothing but love. I've seen that.
Yeah, but that's more
That's
of a
kind of
modern.
That's a modern deal. Yeah, it's a.
But I've still seen them.
They almost that was almost
They've
back
changed so
then.
much.
Like in the 1940s and 50s and 60s, we all think of that. We think of Tarzan showing defiance, Didn't we?
You're
Yes.
saying they beat the breast for what reason?
Huh?
Are you saying the reason why they beat the breast?
I said it was not for sadness. It was like saying it's over.
You don't believe that it was
Guilt.
because they took remorse and guilt because they realized also the same thing as the centurion, who, if you go back to Matthew, is the same centurion and with others that were guarding Jesus at this time. And many of them, if you read this, many people saw what happened with Jesus. And just like centurion and others, and just like one of the two criminals who obviously had a little bit of history with Jesus, a little bit, at least some doing remorse, and they finally hit him and said, oh my goodness, look what we've done.
I don't think so, and I take it, why? Because just a little bit later, when they preached in Acts 2, up to 50,000 that was there, only 3,000 obeyed the gospel. Most of them didn't.
Well, the crowds had always been kind of with Jesus. It was the Jews, the Sanhedrin, Pharisees and Sadducees.
Not at the end. They were saying, crucify him, when they looked out and asked the audience. And this is the same audience when he looked and said, what should I do with Jesus? And they said, what? Who did that? Who said that?
The Jews said that
The crowd said that.
Yeah.
Crowd.
That was the same crowd that was with him from that point on.
But I'm just thinking, when they see what's happening, that they would possibly be showing remorse. It's like, oh, we just kind of got hung up in this mob mentality.
I hope
Now
you're right,
things
but
have changed, and, oh, I'm sorry that we just got involved.
I hope you're right, but I've always heard that it was like beating their chest, not holding their heart.
I'm sure there probably are some that were showing remorse, but at the same time, if you go back to the Roman gladiators, when they would go into the Colosseums,
They would beat
and they would beat their chest during that.
Yeah.
Kind of like what you were saying, egging things on, or
Well, and-
clapping towards it.
This is good, but let's go just to the next verse, okay? And it said this, we talking about, and the whole, beat their breast and return. But now look at 49. But all of his acquaintances and the women who followed him from Galilee stood at a distance watching these things. So they did not feel safe being close to those others that did this.
They stayed
And then
away.
that's one reason, they didn't get them closer. They even stayed away. Those that beat their chest was not his acquaintances, those that knew him, and those women from Galilee. They stood, what did it say they did?
A distance
They
away.
stood at a distance away from those that beat their chest and then left.
So that's why I feel like they weren't feeling remorse, because the others were
Well-
staying away from them.
Now, to say that there wasn't no remorse would be wrong, but I'm saying that I don't think the crowd,
Yeah, that's what
Felt
I mean, the
remorse.
crowd that was beating their chest.
I hope that there was some holding their heart. I think there was some, I hope, that was holding their heart, but there were some of them, I think, beating their,
That was glad.
I mean, because if it had to been, I think instead of 3,000 the day of Pentecost, and they had estimated the crowd on that day would have been 50,000, I think instead of 3,000, there would have been half of them on that first day. But they chose. But I do know, and notice that the centurion is the only soldier that he mentioned, and not the others. The others had mocked him. The other soldiers we know at the very death was mocking him all the way. So,
But I'm just saying that that centurion was with, there was others with that centurion guarding him.
yeah, and those are the ones that mocked him, the soldiers. They was mocking him. But, I wish I could say all of them converted and all of them said, well, we are sorry, but I don't see that, especially even later on, that they did it. Because here it says, verse 49, but all of his acquaintances and the women who followed him from Galilee stood at a distance watching these things. It says, now behold, there was a man named Joseph, a council member, a good and a just man. And he had not consented to the decision and deed He was from a city of the Jews, who himself was also waiting for the kingdom of God. This man sent to Pilate and asked for the body of Jesus. Then he took it down, wrapped it in a linen, and laid it in a tomb that was hewed out of the rock where no one had ever laid before. That day was the preparation of the Sabbath as the Sabbath drew near. And the women who had come with him from Galilee followed after. And they observed the tomb and how the body was laid. And they returned and prepared spices and fragrant oil. And they rested on the Sabbath according to the commandment. Now notice this. He came in, but the women still yet, even though he took the body down, he went to Pharaoh, he had been the member of the council, those women still didn't go up to him because they knew the council had condemned him. And those women did not know that he had voted against it. Does it make sense? Women wasn't in there. And so because of that, they didn't go to Joseph and say, can we bear? They stayed away because they still didn't know who was, I think, responsible. They stayed away, saw where he'd laid, then they went home and did what? They prepared the Sabbath for him. Great discussion. I'm just trying to get us to look at this, but you see what we have here is the feelings that people had. They stood, his disciples, acquaintances, I like that. They stood afar off. The only one we know, according to John and others, it says that even the Romans would let the immediate family to come close to the prisoner.
Matthew said that the guards who were with the centurion also feared greatly and said, "This is the Son of God."
Okay, so some of them did. Yes, okay. That's what I'm saying. There was some, and we know according to history that Roman soldiers was the largest outside of Jews, the largest single identity that were converted to Christianity was the Roman soldier. According to Fox, historians through that, it's hard to imagine, but outside of the Jews, they say that half the Jews in Judea and 25% of the Jews in the whole Roman Empire converted to Christianity. And they said the outside of that first 100 years, or first 200 years, the other group that was converted more than anything else was Roman soldiers.
Paul spent a lot of time, I think, with some of these soldiers.
Yeah, we see that in Acts, don't we, over and over. So, the Roman soldiers, and even today, this is going to sound funny, but even today, there's a lot of work being done. I knew there was one brother up in West Virginia that he came in from Iraq, and his wife was so thrilled. He came in, he had been baptized in Iraq. Just some of our brethren in Iraq. There was a lot of baptism, and always have been in our military, because of people that have been converted in the military for that. And so I think I can understand that the military had that type of, well, one said, a military mind is somebody that knows that you have to obey rules and take orders. Sounds like a perfect foundation of mind for the Bible, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Doesn't that sound like the same perfect foundation? Let's bow and we have a prayer as we end. Dear Almighty God, we're so thankful that we can be here this night. Thank you for the discussion. Help us that we might glean from your truth that we need to love, we need to trust, and we need to follow you and your Son. Be with us, we ask, in your Son Jesus Christ's name. Amen.